Yeah, and I think, and I was looking down to the age too, because one of the things you see with Biden's appeal is that the older base Democratic voters are with him, and I think that broke down similarly. I think it's reflective on the moment in time we're at. We have a president unhinged, in my opinion, right? Rolling back many things that people thought were sacrosanct. Not sure about their place in the world. The populism that he came in on that is still present about inequality and income and wealth. And so I think people say, well, we might need something really different if we're going to counteract and change these trends. And so I think you're seeing that in younger people. I think it's the appeal of Warren and Sanders, particularly with younger voters. And so I don't think it's a rebuke of President Obama. I think it's just more indicative of where we are right now.
No, I see. I do think it's a big rebuke of President Obama, which is that he came in on the greatest mandate of change in the history of this country and basically hired the exact same people, ran the country as generally like a neoliberal holding government for 8 years, and that led to the rise of Donald Trump. And people saw that even Trump comes in, the biggest shaker, really. I mean, it's a true movement change in politics, Patrice, and still not that much changed, right? Like Washington is a hard place to break, and that's what that 46% number is, and that's what it represents.
Yeah, I think so. The challenge for Obama is that he thought that by imposing greater government on people was going to be something that would be a winning strategy. And I honestly think that people saying 46% of Democrats saying, yeah, we don't want to go back to that it says a lot. And in the general poll, in the general election, let's say you have this disrupt the system once again versus what President Trump has, I think regular Americans will look and say, you know what, the Obama agenda of tax and spend and bigger government regulations actually hurt me. The Trump agenda of deregulation and tax cuts, but particularly deregulation, has actually stimulated the economy in a greater way than the Obama economy ever did. And so, I look at these polls and I say at the end of the day, Democrats don't know what they want, but the general populace, I think, will really recognize that we are better off now than we were before.
Yeah,
well,
I don't know.
I'm not sure I read it.
I don't know that the data bears that out, because if you look at the people who are saying we need to move on from Obama, it's the young people who are supporting Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren who are saying we need to go further than what we've been doing. And kind of to your point, Will, I think that the Trump election, in many ways, it's radicalized Democrats in different directions. You see people going way out here on Russiagate in that direction radically. You see people who are more open to these sort of universal programs like Bernie Sanders. But the bottom line is it really broke open the idea that we have to stick with this neoliberal consensus, or that that's the only way that we can get elected, because that's what the Obama era represented. And meanwhile, we lost across the country, we lost the House, we lost the Senate, and ultimately lost the presidency. So it was this real reckoning of, wait a second, we've been accepting this like centrist triangulating approach because you told us this is what we have to do to win, and now we lost.
Well, just on the first point, I will address that. I think if you look at Virginia and Kentucky, the people who are going to get Medicaid expansion, who are still benefiting from Obamacare, and are going to have health care and actually live and survive, and children on their insurance, I think they would tell a different story about whether they're better off or not. But to your point, I think it's split, though. If you look at, we've talked about this before, the freshman Democrats that came in, most of them were moderates. And so you have, having with a moderate message, you do have AOC, you do have others that got elected. So I think you have this kind of figuring it out moment. I agree with you. The base, the energy is with the throwing out the neoliberal kind of let's get our own version of populism and progressivism. But there is still this core in America where a lot of people got elected and they're trying to figure out, well, where am I and what do I do? And I don't know if that's been answered.
What they're not doing anything, and that's the main thing. They got to Washington and nothing happened, right? I mean, it's been 2 years since they got here.
It's not the Senate. It's passing very far left policies in the House that have no chance of passing because they're not bipartisan. And I don't think that's a good way of governing.
Mitch McConnell wasn't going to, it doesn't matter.
Neither of them are going to do anything. They wouldn't do anything if the reverse happened.
The one thing I will say about the moderates winning, part of that is also that's who the party continues to support and prop up and fund.
Think about who gets the money.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
I have never talked about Rising, mainly because the hosts, Crystal Ball and Cigar, I'm forgetting what his last name is, generally say things that I kind of just nod my head at in agreement with and keep it moving. And one of the problems with being I guess from their perspective, a larger platform group, is oftentimes you have to acquiesce to bringing on hosts that are supposed to challenge you by having these differing viewpoints. But I'm sorry, that segment was terrible. That Democratic strategist, that man and that woman, were like a combination of objecting to reality and facts and basic conclusions that I've come to over the last 2 years and arguably longer than that. And I'll just run down a couple of things they said. So when Saagar was talking about the neoliberal failure of Obama's years and how this was, a refusal to capitalize on the progressive push that came in after the 2008 housing crisis, and really just all of the events of the Bush years, right? So an anti-war message, trying to get an actual working healthcare system, and when he mentions, in these states, they have the Medicare expansion, yeah, it's like, no, where you can show me a few states where copays and deductibles aren't screwing people over as much, we can look at the whole rest of the of the country and deduce that single payer would have been a better option. And this will be the same guy who said his next thing would probably be, Obama had the Republicans in office and he couldn't do anything. But the Democrats had a supermajority in the Senate and they had the House for 2 years. Now you had this woman and she says the Trump economy of deregulation, and she kind of, I don't know if she's a conservative, but whenever I hear people talk in general terms about things, because I've mentioned before that 76% of Americans live in paycheck to paycheck, started before Trump, and it started from a housing crisis with low wages that would never go up. There are factors that all have been confirmed to have been around before him. And this happened between Democrats and Republicans. So when I hear the talking of big government, and I just roll my eyes, because you had a continuation of the same type of evasion of addressing certain issues relating to income inequality. And instead of saying, now, what did these people do as it pertains to the wages or the housing crisis or anything that can just say, what was this problem and how did particular presidents or particular politicians, when they were in power, do something to change this? They just go, those regulations and the economy is so great. And I said before, the economy is not, and I repeat, is not an indicator of wealth. Every single person can be employed and still be poor because they can't afford anything. They just, they're getting by basically. As relates to the economy, you can have one person, which is what's been the case with stock buybacks, buy something that's very expensive and it has the same effect as 40 people buying something that's inexpensive. So it's one person with wealth making it seem good because they're getting off to the fact that they already have wealth that they can spend, and it's in place of regular people going out in large numbers and spending. That's why when we were talking about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we kept mentioning that 83% of the wealth went to the top 1%. That was something that kept being repeated for that explicit reason. But my favorite part that has been driving me bonkers as I've replayed this clip now twice, is when the lady says something to the effect of the far left policies that have been, or legislation that has been passed in the House can't make it in the Senate because it's not bipartisan. Every single time a Democrat tries to pass something, they always say it's because it's too far part of their party. But when Republicans do something, it's just this moderate proposal. And I don't understand why the Democrats don't want this and what's wrong with them. But secondly, if you can't pass anything because you have a Republican Senate or another chamber that has Republicans in it, then win the chamber back. Don't look at your party. And this is why I said there's such a narrow-minded position by these people, because she can't cite any examples of how these things are super far left. I don't really see much of a difference with any of the Democrats on gun control. It's usually just background checks, which are supported by 97% of the population. But I can cite that and say, what about that is far left? She probably couldn't come up with a reason. But this is why I said these people don't really know much about what they're talking about, and they've just been hired to regurgitate the same talking points you could hear from another 99 different commentators on any other network, which takes away from the special nature of watching Rising, because you actually have two regular hosts who are fairly decent, progressive individuals. The other point that I just wanted to throw in here at the end is that you have the guy who says most of the Democrats that won in the midterm were moderates, and AOC is an exception. Well, it's very hard to win any election, whether it's for governor, for senator, for congressman, for president, if you have a media that ignores you and you say, I'm going to only take donations from regular people, which means you don't get to have the ad space and you have your name floated everywhere. There's a reason when Steyer, the one billionaire in the presidential primary right now, when he got in, he was able to get at 5 and 6%, whereas other people had been in for months and still couldn't get that far. It wasn't because he was some, great champion of the people who had everyone wowed by his message. No, it was the fact that he spent money on ads. He could do that because he had the money. And progressives usually don't have the cash. But regardless of that, the main reason all those moderates won wasn't because they have some winning message of, we're going to save Obamacare. The reason they won was because of Trump fatigue. It is very, very common for the party that has the White House to lose one of its chambers or both of its chambers over the course of that person's presidency. I think actually the one time it didn't happen was the younger Bush and that was after 9/11. That was a very extreme circumstance. So, garbage commentators. I recommend watching The Rising. Ball and Cigar are very good hosts. It's just when they have these panelists on here, it gets ridiculous. These people don't know what they're talking about. If anyone actually follows this stuff with any serious nature, they can see through their scam. And that's what they're playing, a little scam to trick you into thinking that the way things currently are going is somehow better than what Sanders or any other progressive would want. That's anything but the case.